5, 4,
Five,
3,
four,
2,
three,
1. We are live.
blast off!
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Burning Subjects. I'm your host, Andrew Delgado, and today we have, of course, our regular team of the Cylinder Cox Discord server.
Well, the main honcho and one of the extras and a regular member.
Yes, but today we're going to be talking about the top 15 steamers that have not operated in the preservation era at the time of this recording. And make sure that you know this, that on the list, in order for it to have made the list, it had to have operated primarily in the USA during its revenue service. And it can make the list whether it has a possible chance of returning to service or if it doesn't. So, from locomotives that might have a chance of operating in the future to locomotives that are doomed to never run again. We're going to talk about the top 15 steam locomotives that have not operated in the preservation era. And so before we actually begin the list, and what are your thoughts? What are you predicting is going to be on this list? What locomotives are you predicting is going to be on this list?
I really don't know. Well, I mean, you've already spoiled some of it.
Well, some of it for you guys.
But I've kind of forgotten.
All right. So let's get to the list. Number 15. Union Pacific 9000. Union Pacific 9000 is a 3-cylindered 412-2 locomotive built by the Union Pacific. And already heavy freight trains. And, well, most of the time these locomotives, they wouldn't get the chance to let loose because of the areas they would run being, well, since they were rigid frame locomotives, they really couldn't go around any tight curves. And so that's why they were restricted to a very, very certain route.
Can you hear us, by the way?
Now we can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that the 9000s only operated on any kind of flat territory, regardless of where it was on the UP system.
But either way, how many of the 9000s class survive?
Just 9000 yourself.
Yep, sole survivor. And, well, it's one of the very few 3-cylinder locomotives that I can name that are actually homegrown from America and, well, still exist in America. And,
well, there's a bit of a foreign influence on the 9000s because they were also fitted with the conjugated valve gear on the middle cylinder that was drawn up by Sir Nigel Gresley on the London and Northeastern Railway in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
So yeah, Gresley left his mark on the United States.
And, well, 9000... The reason that the 9000 in particular is on this list is because of its very, very low chance of ever operating again. And its very high, well, uniqueness, shall we say. You know, high quirks. 3 cylinders.
12 driving wheels on a rigid frame.
Yeah, 12.
3 steam cylinders, which is very rare nowadays on American steam engines.
Yes.
And that's not Gresley's conjugated valve gear, like I just mentioned. So, yeah, and the fact that it really can't go around very sharp curves, so you need a ton of flat terrain to run it on.
So, to say the least...
Isn't there something else that the 9000 had that Jim doesn't like?
Oh, yeah.
We're not mentioning that here, Michael, because, yeah.
We're talking
I'm
positive.
just talking about the reasons why it... I mean, the more objective reasons why it probably won't run anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's the big reason that it's number 15. And now,
Because of the way how the frames are made in the United States, casting it in one unit with the steam cylinders, yeah, you crack that frame, it's a finisher.
Yeah. And now for number 14, which we actually talked about in the last Burning Subjects video. Number 14.
Wait. You're going to say Union Pacific 5511, aren't you?
Nope. Union Pacific 3977. One of only two.
Yes, the Greyhound Challenger.
Yes. Only one of 2 remaining Challengers left in the U.S. This locomotive was built in
1943. Same batch as 3985.
Same. Well, it's basically a sister locomotive. The only difference is,
if you want to look at the Jobblemon Challengers as male instead of female.
Yeah. But
big boy's little brother, but whatever.
Yes. But either way, 3977 is, well, the only surviving of the Challengers, which are only 2, that still has its Greyhound passenger livery, which, well, to be honest, it's nice. Very nice.
Like I said in the previous episode, currently it's the only preserved UP steam locomotive to wear the Greyhound paint job. All other locomotives are at least repainted, or they were attempted to be repainted to be the standard black with gray smoke box and firebox.
Yes.
And there's a fairly simple reason why the 3977 won't run again. It was quite literally used as a bit of a donor locomotive for the 3985 when it was converted to burn oil in 1990.
Yes.
So, yeah. Also, I keep hearing a weird sound from your end.
Yeah, it's like this random buzz.
Like a buzz?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But, well, now that we have covered 3977, on to number 13, which most people probably wouldn't have expected. Number 13. Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, number 576. Now, before I actually get into this locomotive, I bet you're wondering, why is it on the list? It's going to be restored. That's exactly why it's on the list, because it's going to be in operation, but it hasn't operated yet. The reason this locomotive is on the list is because it is the only remaining locomotive left in the entire world from the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad. 576 is a J1, I think it's J1, class 484 locomotive built for the J3 class, built for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis. And of course, like all other 484s, they were retired by the time diesel came over. And well, the 576 was put in a park. But even when it wasn't operating at all, it gained a very infamous career, such as bands making songs about it, steam enthusiasts making replicas of it, until finally, in 2015, a club known as the Nashville Steam Preservation Society bought the locomotive from the park in an attempt to get the locomotive running again. And, well...
by the way, you said that it was infamous for being, for having songs made about it. You mean famous, right?
Well,
infamous is famous for the wrong reasons.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was famous for, having songs written around it. A couple of songs, such as, I think it was Queen of the Dixie Line. And so 5 years ago, the locomotive was moved out of the park and has been under restoration since then. And, well...
Also,
yes?
I've heard that I've also seen a picture of Johnny Cash just casually leaning up to one of the driving wheels on the locomotive. So
yes.
That helped to further kind of make the locomotive a bit of a Nashville icon, I think. Because Johnny Cash was also from Nashville, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things.
And I also have to feel like I got to bring up a certain quirk, seeing how Steven isn't here at the moment. But yeah, he actually brought out something pretty valid. Notice how a lot of railroads in the South and maybe the Southeast, they had 484 Northerns,
Yes.
But they were all classified as J's, and they were all numbered in the 600 series.
All right. What is today's topic?
Oh, yeah.
The
Remember?
top 15 steam engines that haven't operated in the preservation era.
Oh, yes, I completely forgot.
Yes. And,
I was just mentioning the thing that you pointed out about a lot of northerns that operated in the south and maybe the southeast. Being numbered in the 600 series and classified as J's on various different railroads. Norfolk and Western, Chesapeake and Ohio, Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis. Even if they didn't call them northerns, at the end of the day, they're still northern.
You forgot one. It's from a railway in Virginia.
and what is that?
The Virginian?
No.
Potomac's?
You're close. It's the name of the railway.
Western Maryland.
No, not that one.
The Lackawanna?
No.
Redrick's.
It was a railway in Virginia. You were right about Potomac. That's part of the name of the railway.
Something Burns Potomac Railroad.
RFMP. Yes, finally.
Yes. All right. Now that we've covered basically the first three that are kind of the hey, you might want to know about these because hey, we talk about these engines a lot. But now, number 12. Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 5000. Madam Queen.
Yes, the railroad's first purpose-built Texas-type locomotive.
Yes.
If I recall correctly, because they did have a Texas before, but it was really just a Santa Fe type with a botched-on four-wheel trailing bogie, to put it bluntly, right?
Yeah.
Wait, there was? Is there a picture of one?
But either way, now into the history of 5000. 5000 was the first official 210-4 Texas-type locomotive built for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. It was built for long-distance freight trains, which most of the time would just go pretty slowly. But, well, of course, like all of the other locomotives during the steam era, it was retired in the 50s. And, well, remained on display for quite a while. But the reason it's on this list so badly is because it's one of the very few locomotives in America that are actually given an official name. I mean, name a couple of engines in the U.S. that actually have a name. Like
5300, a.k.a. President Washington.
And I want to name 3713, the Constitution.
How about
And Norfolk Western 611, the Spirit of Roanoke.
Yes, the Spirit of Roanoke.
The Texan, the Jupiter.
Yes, the
Jupiter.
Leviathan.
But like when it comes to more modern locomotives, you don't have that many.
Yeah.
And 611 only got that name following its second big refurbishment in the preservation era in the mid-2000s. I mean, the mid-2010s, that's what I meant. Yes.
But either way, and the other reason that the 5000 is on this list is because not many 210-4 locomotives have ever operated in the preservation era. What is the only 210-4 locomotive you can actually name has definitely operated in excursion?
Texas 10. They operated the Freedom Train, yet no one gives a fuck about how it operated the Freedom Train. They only mention 2101 and 4449.
Yeah, exactly. We need...
I mean, there was also the Southern Steam Program.
Well, yeah, obviously. I saw a picture of, I think there was a doubleheader. I think 722 performed a doubleheader with that engine, 610.
Well, now that we have discussed 5000, now we go on to the more known locomotives and some of the more underrated locomotives. Number 11, Chesapeake and Ohio, 1601.
Yes. The oldest of the two preserved Allegheny locomotives.
And, well, why is this on the list? Because 1601 is doomed to never operate again. Even though it's in it's almost perfect condition, when it was put into the museum.
That's the reason. I mean, imagine all the freaking shit you would have to do to, like, get that engine out of there.
To say the least, the locomotive.
They have to remove the doors till all the locomotives actually squeeze into the building when they got. When they
Not only that, but if I'm not mistaken, that same museum operates narrow gauge trains already, doesn't it?
I think. But
No, I think Andrew continue what he was trying to say before.
But yes, 1601 is trapped, basically. When they moved 1601 after her retirement in the 50s, the locomotive was built into the museum because of how big it was. And thus, the only way the 1601 would ever be able to roll out of the building was if they tore down a wall. But what is the 1601? Well, it was one of the...
It's the oldest of the two preserved CNL Alleghenies.
And what is an Allegheny? It is a
2666 simple articulated.
And why are they so infamous?
But hey, I guess they got the job done when they did, their work and stuff.
But yes.
Yeah, lawsuits notwithstanding.
Yeah, we won't talk about that here because that was bad. But either way, the 1601, along with all of its other sister locomotive Alleghenies, the Alleghenies were made to, of course, conquer the Allegheny Mountains, which is why they were named Alleghenies. But they were also part of a series of locomotives of extending the firebox to create more heat, more steam, more power, more speed.
Well, not necessarily more speed, but rather to produce a larger quantity of steam in a shorter amount of time.
Yes.
So, yeah. Now, it started off quite humbly with a lot of locomotives that had 4 trailing wheels instead of 2.
Such as...
Southerns, 464 Hudsons, and they previously mentioned 2 10-4 Texas types.
Yes.
But then somebody thought, hey, I'm going to make the Texas type bigger and make it 212-6. And guess what? It didn't work until he decided to revive the concept as a simple articulated locomotive.
Yes.
So that explains why the Alleghenies had 6 trailing wheels.
Yes.
So basically they're oversized Texas types, is what we're saying.
To put it bluntly, yes.
Kind of, yeah.
In the middle.
And in fact, the Allegheny currently is one of the tallest steam locomotives ever created. Well, currently anyway.
And the lightest.
The lightest?
No, the widest.
Oh yeah, the widest.
I mean
yes.
Because, hey.
Instead of it's a wide locomotive. Da-da-da-da-da.
Also, I must say this. Would you consider, like, let's say there's a 460 10-wheeler, and then there's a 462 Pacific. Like, would you consider the 462 Pacific, like, when it was first introduced after the 10-wheelers, would you consider that the superpower locomotive of that time?
That's weird, but I don't think I would consider it a superpower.
Maybe?
Sorry, or bronchitis. Just kidding, I'm just coughing, but I wouldn't consider it to be a superpower locomotive. Sorry. Even for its time.
All right. Now.
Granted, I think that, I'm pretty sure that, Pacific has more power than a 10-wheeler.
Well, now it is time for the next one. Number 10. Union Pacific, number 428. This is
a little bit of consolidation that's undergoing an extremely slow refurbishment at the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois. And you gentlemen are welcome.
Yes.
Although I must say, even though, there's already been another Union Pacific Connie operate in the preservation era, and that is 618 at Heber Valley, like in Utah.
That thing is going under an overhaul right now.
I'm just saying it has operated in the preservation era already as well.
It has.
Still.
What about the 428 though?
I don't know much about that engine. What kind of valve gear does that thing have, as well as 618? Because I know that they don't have eccentric rods.
That's Stevenson valve gear.
Okay, yeah. I know the NWN classes, I think some of the first ones actually had Stevenson valve gear.
Yeah. Well, let's move on.
Now?
Or let us continue the whole thing on 428.
Oh, yes, yes. I actually don't know much about 428 until you guys told me. All we know really currently is that it's a simple consolidation built for the Union Pacific. And, well, for some reason, it's been going over an extensive overhaul to the point where, to be honest, by the time that we're all dead, the locomotive will be operating.
Yeah.
It just seems like that.
When did they even start the rebuild?
I have no idea.
Let me actually look this up. Let's see. Let's use the horrible fucking Okay, I'm sorry for dropping the F-bomb, but I can't. I couldn't find much on the goddamn awful friggin' locomotive wiki.
Wait, did you look at steamlocomotive.com? Is there anything on that?
I'm looking up at the official site of the Illinois Railway Museum, and there's no specific date for when they started it. It just said it was acquired by the IRM in 1969 and has been undergoing a complete restoration for some time.
I'm assuming, just from the guess there, I'm assuming they've been working on it for 25 or just 20 years. I'm just assuming them.
Yeah.
But either way, the fact that this locomotive's restoration has been taking so long is why it's on this list.
I mean, it really puts that one Pennsy Pacific to shame.
1361.
Yep.
Next.
All right, number 9. This is one of the very few steam locomotives on this list that I've actually seen in person, though. Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 5629. This 484 was built for this, well, I'm good, but either way, it was built for the CB&Q, of course, for fast passenger and freight service. But, well, of course, it was retired. But the thing is, we won't be talking about the 5629, but rather its fallen sibling.
Uh-oh. Get your fishes out, folks.
56.
Ladies and gentlemen, get your fishes out, because you'll probably be crying because it was owned by the infamous Richard Jensen.
So here's the story of her fallen sibling, 5632. 5632 was the same class of locomotive as 5629. And
no, not quite from what I remember. 5629 was an 05A, I think, and the 5632 was an 05B. But
well, they're sort of sisters.
But yeah, differences are minor. But just
either way, after their retirement, the 5632 was the lucky locomotive to be pulled out of retirement and operate for their steam program, along with Mikado number 4960, which operates today still at the Grand Canyon Scenic Railroad. So the 5632, of course, operated excursions.
Wasn't there a Hudson that operated that steam program as well?
No, I don't think there was.
Wasn't it a 3001 or something like that? I don't even know. I know it was a 3000 class engine.
But either way, 5632 became quite the rambler on those runs. No reference intended, sort of. But either way, the locomotive also became known as the world's largest brass model when it was painted gold to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the CB&Q. But sadly,
I don't think the company itself, but rather a specific route. That was in 1964, if I recall correctly.
Think so, anyway. But either way, then 5632's luck began to change. After, soon, Mank retired.
CB&Q first got a new president, and Louis Manx, who took over from Harry Murphy, who was the guy that actually had the locomotive saved from the scrapyard, so he could have the 5632 in use on that steam program. But then when Manx took over, he wasn't interested in running steam because he was, He was more so the boring kind of person who was all about the money. Like, we're only going to run diesels. These steam engines have got to go. And so he sold the 5632
to Richard Jensen.
Richard Jensen. Or, Dick Jensen.
But either way.
I don't know if it would be worse if it were bought by freaking Steamtown. Then again, I know it wouldn't have been bought by Blonde at that time because at that time, if I'm not mistaken, probably would have already passed away.
Let me continue to tell the story here. All right. At some point, Jensen had to move out of the Chicago roundhouse where he was for years, that he had leased, and he had to move his equipment to a scrapyard for storage. But then disaster struck. When the 5632 was brought in, it derailed on a switch, I believe, and the people who worked at the scrapyard simply couldn't put the locomotive back on the rails.
And
now,
so
I'm willing to bet that those scrapyard employees didn't want to cut the locomotive up, but unfortunately, that was the only chance they had of clearing the tracks. So, yes, unfortunately, the 5632 was broken up for scrap.
Right,
because simply they didn't have any way of re-railing it.
Well, it's a partial thanks to what's-his-face, Manx and Jensen. Like, Manx didn't want to run steam and then ended up, they ended up selling that engine to Jensen, who didn't do a good job. Basically, let's just say that Jensen added fuel to the fire. No pun intended.
But I don't think it was necessarily Jensen's fault that he got kicked out of that roundhouse. It was just a really horrible bit of bad luck that did the 5632 in. That derailment on the track in the scrapyard. Like, if it had been the tender, maybe they could have torched that. But if the locomotive itself was still on the rails, who knows? It might have been around today. It just would have needed a new tender or something. But yeah.
But either way, 5629 has a pretty big chance of operating in the future. As well, when I went there, I actually went to go take a look and see how good of condition it was, and it's in surprisingly great condition. And to say the least, if anyone who actually has the heart and the ability to do it, 5629 could operate in place of 5632 in the future.
Maybe ask Jason Sipchinsky to further check, because he's quite a steam locomotive madman. As in, he's a genius.
But either way, now that we have pressed F to pay respects, on to number 8, which is a very unusual locomotive. Number 8, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 1010. This is a prairie locomotive built for the Santa Fe for high-speed passenger operations. It was built during the 1919, and it operated into the 1950s. And the reason this particular locomotive out of all the prairies is on the list is because 1010 broke a speed record. 1010 reached...
No, not the speed record. Go ahead.
No, not the speed record, but a passenger speed record. And, well, after that, the 1010 was kept in the roster as a little reliable engine. Even after 2926 was retired, which is another Santa Fe locomotive, a northern, though. 1010 was mostly used for other things, but then it was actually used in a movie, which I forgot the name of. And then it was actually used in a car commercial. But then after its short movie star career, it was stored in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the old roundhouse. It was stored there for over 50 years until finally it was bought by another museum and transported there. The 1010 still remains on display to this day as a testament to one of the many passenger trains around the world that sadly don't exist today. And what was the passenger train it called? The Scott Special. But either way, 1010 might have a bright future in the might have a bright future if anyone would be willing to comply. But either way, Stephen.
Steven!
What?
We have a locomotive that you might want to talk about. You ready?
No, boy.
Number 7. Southern Pacific, number 2914.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that this locomotive is on the list is because it is a sole survivor for the railroad's 480. Either way, Mastodon types.
And not only that, but it's also the only Mastodon that's preserved in the States that's not a Norfolk and Western Mastodon.
Yes. And to be honest, the only Mastodon that I think we all know is running today is
the NNW 475.
Yes.
Oh, but it won't be the only one for long.
Yeah, Stephen wants to restore 433. But either way, the 2914 is another one of those Mastodons built for the Southern Pacific. But well, of course, he was retired like all of the other steam locomotives. But to be honest, I couldn't find that much information about 2914, so we probably won't talk about this locomotive for long. But either way, 2914 became a sole survivor for its railroad's Mastodons. And to be honest, I'm surprised that no one has even taken a look at this particular locomotive.
Well, I am kind of planning to build it in Gmod.
But either way, number 6, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 940.
Yes, the only surviving Santa Fe type locomotive from the Santa Fe Railroad.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes. But either way, 940 was the first 210-2 locomotive built. Well, not the first, but the only surviving 210-2 Santa Fe type built by the Santa Fe. And well, currently it survives barely. So to say the least, this locomotive is very lucky to still be around here because it was actually almost caught up. It was originally a scrapyard until a museum bought it, and well, that's where it's been today. And well, it could be a pretty good excursion star. I'm just surprised that no one's actually taking.
And then there's also, what are other Santa Fe types that have been preserved in the States? I know there's some like SP ones that have been preserved at like the Illinois Railroad Museum, but they're in shit condition.
Union Pacific 5511. Duh.
And of course,
Do the Chinese QJs count?
yes, and you know my favorite.
740.
I don't call it 7040.
But you get the point.
Yes.
All right, and now for the final 5. And we're going to flip the number of 940 around real quickly. So now we got number 5.
Chesapeake and Ohio 490 is number 5. Am I right?
Correct. Chesapeake and Ohio
Yes.
490 is on this list for 2 reasons. One, it is the only remaining Chesapeake and Ohio 464 left in the world, and it's also one of the only probably the only locomotive left in the world with what kind of valve gear?
Franklin poppet valve gear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of, apparently one of my friends, known as Nostalgia Carl or Eric Carl, apparently he wants to see the engine return, and I'm like, really, dude? And it seems a little bit redundant, partially because of the valve gear, and not only that, but because Owen Hardy wants to restore the 5300, which is at the same museum as the 490.
I think 490 would be an interesting candidate for restoration.
Interesting.
I mean the poppet valve gear was controversial, but think about the T1 truss. They're trying to improve the poppet valve gear thing. So
Yeah, Type B poppet valve gear is what I personally would put on it, or Caprati.
I mean, if these guys, if they can restore 490 and keeping the poppet valve gear, I would be impressed. In general, I just think 490 is a really gorgeous streamliner.
Yes.
I don't think it is. I even got to say that it has never looked good before. Like its current streamlining look, not so good. But before that, it was actually one of the world's most abysmal looking Pacifics.
Yeah,
An external let's go heater and air compressors on the front of the smoke box on a passenger locomotive. What the fuck went wrong there? Apologies for the F-bomb. Now you have to mark this video as not made for kids.
Great.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't mark my videos as made for kids because honestly, I'm not targeting kids.
Well,
next. Would you rather? Would you rather have 490 pulling whatever passenger train she was assigned to pull, or would you rather have that problematic turbine? If you don't,
oh god, oh.
If you choose none, then congratulations, you're not going anywhere.
I choose none, and I have my own backup choice, the CNO J3 Greenbriers. Now, let's continue with the list.
All right.
Wait, I was going to say something.
Yes?
490 is actually the only streamlined Hudson left in the United States.
Yes.
Of course, there are other.
What about 2839?
Okay, American built. Okay, if you count 2839, which is at the Nethercutt Automobile Collection in Solmar, California, which actually did operate in the States in the preservation era as late as 1985.
In terms of all Hudsons that are preserved in North America, we got a few. We got CB&Q. We got Canadian Pacific, of course. We got Canadian National.
We got one Santa Fe. We got one Santa Fe.
Wait,
Hudson.
A Santa Fe Hudson?
Yeah.
Oh,
3463. Now let's continue.
All right. Number 4. Now, before I actually mention number 4, this one's going to be very controversial. And the thing is, the reason it's on this list is not because of looks, but because of, well, uniqueness and impossibilities. Number 4, Southern Pacific, number 4294.
The sole surviving cab forward. It's a real shame there are no other cab forwards besides that one. I would have liked to see maybe the 4274 on preserved.
From what I've heard, 4294's condition is like not the best. So
now, to say the least,
so I guess that's the.
It honestly is a giant freaking cab forward. I mean, really, that's going to be a fucking nightmare for preservationists to even try to restore. I mean, it was more than likely a nightmare for the UP steam crew to rebuild the big boy.
Before anybody suggests, Union Pacific restored the 4294. They won't do it because it's a foreign locomotive.
And
Southern Pacific was absorbed by Union Pacific in 1996. They won't refurbish a Southern Pacific steam engine. Not to mention, I don't think that the cab forward locomotive in service today is even that good of an idea.
Well,
because it will probably require its own very unique training procedure to get people qualified to run it.
Well,
I mean, granted, the visibility's there, but you've got a point, Jim.
Well, now, if I may speak,
you probably have some controls in front of you, but I'm pretty sure that there are still some controls on the back end. So you gotta go back and forth between looking forward and then looking back at the back head that's behind you.
I'm gonna be as blunt as I can.
Back head. Who would have thought?
I'm gonna be as blunt as I can be here. Union Pacific is just an ass to other preservationists. I mean, we get it. They got the big boy running. They got 844 running, but they beat those fuckers to the ground and foreign locomotives from former fallen flags. That's
the one thing that I do kind of dislike about Union Pacific nowadays. they don't allow foreign steam engines to run on their trackage anymore, which in turn means a lot of former engines that, which in turn that a lot of engines that could go on there previously no problem, including the 4449, they're now kind of outlawed.
Well, let's actually talk about the real reason that it's on this list. One, well, of course, it's the sole surviving cab-forward steam locomotive left the entire world. And two, it's one of the only, I think it's actually the only locomotive left in the entire world with a 2-884 wheel arrangement.
A 482.
I mean, 4882, yeah.
In terms of 2-884s, which are called Yellowstone,
yeah.
there are three others left from the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range.
Yes.
So
but to say the least,
most Southern Pacific cab forwards are Yellowstones that are built backwards.
But if you count the AC9s, well, those basically are the reverse cab forwards. For like
Yellowstones.
It's just Southwest. It's just a Southern. It's basically just a Southern Pacific variant of a Yellowstone. So
yeah,
a little bit like semi-streamlining, which is
anyway.
Not really streamlining, but yeah.
Anyway, now a couple more reasons why it's on this list. Because people seem to think that it's just completely hideous. But to say the least, it may be hideous. Maybe. But the 4294, no doubt, is a very, well, it's very unique. And the fact that it's still with us today is impressive. I mean, we can't forget the fact that, one of these cab forwards went over Donner Pass for the last steam-powered passenger trains. And, well, the bigger reason it's on this list is because of how impossible the locomotive will ever have a chance of operating again. 1, cab forward. 2, how big it is. 3, it's inside a building. And what's number 4?
Poor condition.
Yeah. Well, to say the least, the Southern Pacific 4294 is a big F in the chat because that thing is screwed. And now...
Well, she had her chance.
She sort of did. But either way, now for the final 3. Number 3, Baltimore and Ohio 5300.
President Washington,
aka Owen's boner fuel.
Owen, yeah, he would have really wanted to be here for this. But either way, this is this is probably one of the only 4.6. Actually, I think it is the only 462 locomotive on the list. But either way, the only reason this particular 462 is on the list is because, well, it's from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And, well, to be honest, you don't see very many Baltimore and Ohio locomotives operating, even though it was one of probably the first American railroad. And to say the least...
honestly, not only that, the only steam engines you really might see operating are those little ones, like from when the B&O was first, founded. Those locomotives, or replicas of said locomotives.
Yes.
Like the Tom Thumb or the Grasshopper, whatever, those engines.
Yeah. But to say the least, Baltimore and Ohio, even when at the end of its days, they created some of the most impressive locomotives. I mean, state one articulated locomotive, which I secretly like, the EM1. Those ones.
Yes, another Yellowstone.
Yes. Those
it seems to be the only extinct steam engine that anybody gives a shit about on the B&O. Like, what about, I don't know, the big sixes, those 210-2 Santa Fe types that they had?
Yes. But either way, now to number 2, which, to be honest, I feel like Jim is going to go over.
He's going to ejaculate to it, isn't it?
Yeah. Either way.
Hold on. Let me get the sound file ready just in case.
Number 2, Norfolk and Western 2156. You should have seen this locomotive coming on the list. No pun intended. But either way.
Yeah. Very simple reason why it won't run again.
Cracked frame.
3254, first time.
To say the least.
No. 3254 merely had a merely has a bent frame, from what I heard, not a cracked frame.
To say the least. Norfolk and Western 2156 is the sole survivor of the Y6A class 282.
You mean 2882?
I mean 2882 Malays built by the Norfolk and Western. Originally, these locomotives were built to haul some of the longest and heaviest trains. But the thing is, mostly we won't be talking about the Y6As, but rather their predecessors, the Y6Bs. The big ones.
You mean successor?
The successor, yeah. Yes, they're successors. But
also, key thing about 2156, most powerful preserved steam locomotive in the world.
Yes. It is the most...
Tractive effort on that son of a bitch is fucking insane.
156,000 pounds of tractive effort.
Let me actually check that just to be 100% sure.
I think that's correct.
I think it would be quite slow of a runner if it were to be operational.
But to say the least,
40 to 50 miles an hour.
But to say the least,
it's one of those locomotives that I personally consider a drag locomotive.
But to say the least, the Norfolk and Western Y classes went down in history as the strongest steam locomotives to ever ride the rails. Let's press F in the chat for the Y6B, the last one that almost made it into preservation, but sadly,
I'm looking up.
But sadly, was cut up before anyone could have the actual chance to save it.
2174.
Yes, press F in the chat for 2174.
After that excursion, I mean, honestly, I probably would have tried to find a city that would have liked it or something like that. It's a real shame. And when was the Virginia Museum of Transportation founded?
I don't know.
Because honestly, I dare say that would have been a great place for it.
Yeah.
Because it was cut up in 76 and 1218 went there in 1970. So when 1218 was in there at the museum, it was, I don't know, 2174 was still surviving, but well, they tried this, a bunch of people, basically the one chapter of the National Railway Historical Society decided to save it, but I think the head of the funding project died, and then a random company from the United Kingdom, for whatever reason, decided to buy a scrapyard in Virginia. I don't know why. They're like, oh, it's all about that high and mighty pound, so let's just cut up this locomotive. I don't care how significant it is, and then they just cut it up. Now it's gone. We can never see it again. And not to mention one of my I guess kind of former friends actually wants to build a Y6B replica, but he doesn't want to build a full-on replica 2174, which would make a lot of sense given that it was, the one that was scrapped, and the fact that, it had a very
trying to do a new build project. He tries to overstep it. 2201. No, because the last Y6B that was built, number 2200, it's a nice round number, and it also serves as a bit of a definitive milestone because it was the final mainline steam locomotive manufactured in the United States for actual use on the main line. You don't try to overstep that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, then again, there have been other locomotives that built in the 80s. I believe 1658. That's a Mikado that was built for the Knox and Kane, which was a tourist line.
The Chinese steam era didn't come to a close until some point. What, this century?
2005. Actually, no. That was with the Jinping Pass. Apologies if I
China's already doing steam.
Can we go on?
Now,
let me just quickly say something about the whole saying that, why did he buy the scrapyard? Why? Let's say the owner of a company passed away, and He doesn't want the business to go out. Well, what do you want to do? You want to step in and buy. You want to step in and buy that, and you want to know what you get for scrapping stuff? Money. So
yeah, but you can also get money from selling it. Like he could have done, like those British owners could have done the same thing that Di Woodham ended up doing in his scrap yard in Barry in the United Kingdom, which is where he basically sold almost all those steam engines that were there for the scrap value that they were going for.
Well,
he did end up cutting up some locomotives, but most of them sold for preservation.
Well, think about it this way. Let me just say something about. Okay, here's the thing. Probably because I don't know. It's probably because during that time, like probably the owner was just running low on money, and they just had to look for engines in their scrapyard to just break them. The next thing you know, boom, they're back in business. Their company is fine. I mean, look at the White Star Line ship RMS Olympic. She was sent to Scotland for demolition.
Then
and
I'm pretty sure that most of us are not interested in ships.
Right now, guys,
this has been going on long enough.
Okay, now guys.
Sorry.
I bet you're all wondering one thing. Since 2156 is probably one of the most talked about locomotives that aren't operating in the preservation, what's the locomotive that trumped the world's strongest steam locomotive?
Well, the answer?
After a few honorable mentions, Baltimore, Ohio, 4500, Nickel Plate Road, 170, Frisco.
What you mentioned?
4500, B&O 4500.
And
I believe the Mikado.
Frisco 4500. New York Central 3001.
Pennsylvania Railroad E6442 Atlantic number 460.
Northern Pacific 2435.
Literally all New York Central steam locomotives, because none of them have operated in the preservation era.
Union Pacific 4023.
511.
Union Pacific 4023.
Oh, giggity.
Canadian Pacific 2850.
We're talking about American locomotives. Born in America, serving in America.
And of course, Rio Grande Southern 42.
Yes. And now, someone put on some sad music to pay F in the chat for this locomotive.
Hey, dude, can we just get a bot to do it? Like, just...
What locomotive is number one?
All right. Well, now for number one on my top 15 steam locomotives that have not operated in the preservation era. And I'm going to post this in U.S. locomotives so that you can look at it before I mention it to the stream.
In my... Okay.
Yeah, I'm putting it in U.S. locomotives on your... So get ready for this, because your jaw is going to drop.
Hang on, let me get the music thing for this.
Yes, get something like really sad. Kind of like what a 5-chime did for 722.
It's not going through.
Hang on, let me actually put on some sad.
Oh, yes. Oh, this engine.
Number one.
Southern Pacific 4460.
Yeah.
Also known
better print for that.
Also known affectionately as the Forgotten Daylight.
Oh my God, yes, 4460.
The 4460 is the only surviving GS6 locomotive left in America, and the GS4 class is none other than Daylight, number 4449, who stole the thunder of her far more superior sister locomotive. 4460 is another 484 built for the Southern Pacific for the Daylight Express. And, well, unlike 4449, 4460 lost her fame the moment she died. The moment
when it was retired.
When it was retired, it was immediately put on display. And with 4449 stealing her entire chance of ever running again. And to say the least, everyone talks about 4449 nowadays. We all know her. We all know her great Freedom Train delivery, the great excursions she's hauled, her great restoration, her great race with 844. But no one has ever mentioned her fallen sibling.
Actually, because of 4449's restoration, 4460 actually got some fame.
4460 only has 1% of the fame the 4449 has, to say the least.
Actually, she's actually got a shit ton of fans, really.
To say the least, though, the fact that 4460's fame was basically taken from her, and 4460 has not operated at all, and no one has thought to even think about restoring the locomotive. And
actually, a lot of people want to see her running again.
Yes, but to say the least, that since 4460's thunder was basically stolen from her chest, that is a big enough reason to make 4460 my number one pick on my top 15 steam locomotives that have not operated in the preservation era.
That actually went pretty well with the music that I had playing. Also, rather unfortunately, the 4460 was also the subject of a bit of a hoax because there was this one douche nozzle called Dylan Schultz who led a fake project to refurbish the locomotive. And, of course, like I said, it was fake. So, yeah.
It is unfortunate since 4460 is actually well known by a lot of rail fans. I mean, because of 4449, 4460 actually got quite a bit of fame with a lot of people hoping that she would run again and united with 4449 someday. And I'll be honest, I mean, I don't want to be one of those crazy foamers, and I used to be one, granted. I mean, I would have loved to see 4460 run.
We all would.
But right now she's probably tired, like in like a not like in an actual way. You get what I mean? Like,
yes,
like verbally she's tired, like she's tired. And
but to say the least,
I mean 4449 she's good enough. She's taken the show for 4460. At least she's showing off what her and her sisters have done in her past and what 4460 was capable of.
But to say the least, well, that's it for this episode of Burning Subjects. If you liked the video and you want to see more, well, visit us next week, where next week we're going to be going back on track with another scenic railroad.
What's the scenic railroad?
And the scenic railroad we're going to be talking about next time.
Toltec?
Huh?
Cumbres and Toltec, or what?
It's close to that one.
Durango and Silverton.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the Durango and Silverton next time.
Okay, and you know, not to attend to that. Well,
oh, you know what? You want to know what the best narrow gauge railway is?
Cumbres and Toltec.
No. It starts with a T and it's in North Carolina.
Quincy.
Yes.
But either way, that is the end for this podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode of Burning Subjects. And you all have a good day and a good cup of tea.